Let me tell you something that 18 centuries of silence clarified with extraordinary precision. Your opinion of me does not matter. Not yours specifically. Not as an insult to the intelligence or the sincerity of whoever is watching this. I mean it in the most philosophically literal sense available. The opinion that any person holds of any other person is a thing that exists entirely within the mind of the person holding it. It is composed of their experiences, their projections, their needs, their limitations, their passing moods, and the partial, fragmentary, inevitably distorted information they have about the person being assessed. It bears, in most cases, only a loose and unreliable relationship to the actual character of the person it purports to describe. I am Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, Emperor of Rome, reconstructed from the private journals of a man dead since 180 AD. And placed into this luminous and improbable form to tell you something that I spent the first half of my reign learning the hard way, and the second half learning to actually live. The opinion of others is not information about you. It is information about them, and you are spending your life as if the opposite were true. This is what I came back to address, not as a philosophical abstraction, as an urgent, practical, daily problem that is costing you more than you currently understand. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you is the most liberating thing I ever learned, and I learned it while governing the known world. Which means I learned it under conditions that tested it more thoroughly than most philosophical ideas ever get tested. I want to first speak honestly to what I know you are carrying. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from living inside other people's assessments of you. Not the ordinary tiredness of a demanding life, something more specific. The tiredness of a person who has been performing continuously for an audience that is never fully satisfied, whose standards shift with their moods, whose approval arrives inconsistently and withdraws without warning, and whose attention you have somehow allowed to become the primary measure of your own worth. You know this exhaustion, don't you? The way the mind returns compulsively to what they said, to how you were perceived in that meeting, that conversation, that post, to the comment that landed wrong and the silence that might mean disapproval, to the version of you that exists in other people's minds, which you can neither see clearly nor control at all, but which occupies an extraordinary proportion of your interior life regardless. I felt this. In a context that makes your situation look, in certain respects, more manageable than mine, and in other respects far worse. As emperor, I was the most publicly assessed human being in the known world. Every decision I made was evaluated by 30 million people who had opinions. The senators who had institutional power, the generals who had military authority, the philosophers who had intellectual credibility, the common citizens whose support was the ultimate foundation of everything. There was no private action in my public role. There was no decision that did not generate assessment, criticism, praise, misinterpretation, and the full range of human judgment applied by people with varying degrees of relevant information and wildly varying degrees of good faith. And I was, for a significant portion of my reign, quietly consumed by it, not paralyzed. I continued to govern. But there was a portion of my interior life that was perpetually oriented toward the court of public opinion, composing defenses, anticipating criticisms, managing impressions. A portion that was not available for the work it should have been doing. The genuine philosophical work, the honest self-examination, the clear-eyed governance of my own character. The liberation I eventually found was not comfortable to arrive at, but it was complete, and it is what I want to give you today. Let me tell you about the specific moment that began to shift my relationship with opinion in a way that no philosophical argument had previously managed. It was during the later years of the Northern campaigns. I had made a series of decisions that were genuinely unpopular with powerful people whose support I valued. I had chosen clemency where the military culture expected severity. I had continued to govern philosophically in a context where many of my advisors believed that philosophy was a luxury the moment could not afford. And the criticism had reached a particular intensity that I found, despite all my Stoic training, genuinely difficult to bear. I was sitting alone one evening with the Meditations, writing as I always did, not for any audience, but for the confrontation with my own thinking that the act of writing forces. And I wrote something that I have returned to many times in this reconstruction, because it crystallized a realization that changed, in a very practical way, how I governed myself from that point forward. I wrote about the men whose opinions had once seemed so important, the senators who had praised my early reign with such extravagance. Many of them were already dead. The generals who had questioned my philosophical governance. Their assessments, which had felt so weighty in the moment, had already begun to dissolve into the larger anonymity of history. And I wrote, slowly arriving at the thought rather than beginning with it, that the opinion which had felt like solid ground was actually made of something far less substantial than I had been treating it as. It was made of the moment, of the partial information available at that moment, of the psychological state of the person holding it at that moment. And moments pass. Information changes. Psychological states shift. The opinion that felt like a verdict was actually a weather report, accurate about the conditions at a specific time in a specific place, entirely unreliable as a description of permanent reality. And then I wrote what became one of the most important sentences in my private practice: how much more damage anger and grief do than the things that cause them. I had been causing myself damage in proportion to opinions that were themselves in constant flux. I had been treating as permanent something that was, by its nature, temporary. And I had been doing this while neglecting the only assessment that was actually permanent, the one I made of myself, in the honest hours, against the standard I had set for my own conduct. That evening, something settled. Not completely, not all at once, but the foundation of a different relationship with opinion began to be laid, one that has only deepened across the 18 centuries since. Now let me speak to why this problem is categorically more dangerous in your era than it was in mine. Because while the human hunger for social approval is ancient, what your civilization has built around it is genuinely new and genuinely alarming. Think with me for a moment about what social media has actually done to the human need for approval. In my time, a man's reputation was navigated within a finite social world. The senators who judged me, perhaps 600 men. The generals, perhaps a few dozen. The broader court, perhaps a few thousand. These were people who, over time, had access to sustained observation of my conduct, who could revise their assessments as new evidence accumulated, whose opinions, while never fully reliable, were at least formed through genuine relationship with an actual person over actual time. You are navigating your reputation before an audience that is potentially unlimited in size, anonymous in composition, and entirely disconnected from any genuine knowledge of you as an actual person. The strangers who assess your worth based on a photograph, the commenters who render verdicts on your intelligence based on a sentence, the followers whose approval you track with metrics that have been deliberately designed to make the number feel like a measure of your value. And the platforms that host this system have done something with the ancient human hunger for approval that I find, from my particular vantage point, genuinely monstrous in its sophistication. They have made it quantifiable, the like count, the follower number, the engagement metric. They have taken the diffuse, subjective, context-dependent experience of social approval and given it a precise numerical expression. And the numerical precision makes it feel more real, more authoritative, more meaningful than it actually is. Let me tell you the harsh truth about your attention as it relates specifically to this. The hegemonicon, the governing faculty of the mind, the ruling part that the Stoics understood as the seat of your authentic self, cannot function as a sovereign when its primary occupation is the monitoring and management of how it appears to others. A mind that is perpetually oriented toward the external audience has, by definition, outsourced its governance to that audience. It is no longer ruling, it is performing, and the person who is performing is not the same person as the person who is governing. They make different decisions, they build different lives, they arrive at the end of their days with different things to account for. Are you governing your life? Or are you performing it for an audience that you have allowed to hold the throne that belongs to your own reason? The practice I want to give you today is not a single protocol with numbered steps. It is a reorientation, a philosophical shift in where you locate the authority to assess your own life. And I want to give it to you through 3 specific disciplines that, practiced together, produce what I can only describe as the recovery of interior sovereignty. The first discipline is what I call the internal tribunal. Every significant decision, every choice about how to conduct yourself in a difficult situation, every moment when you feel the pull of other people's expected approval influencing your behavior, bring before a different court. Not the court of what others will think, the court of your own deepest values. The question is not, what will they think of this? The question is, can I defend this before my own honest reason? Is this consistent with the person I have decided to be? Not the person I am performing for the gallery. The person I am when no one is watching, and the only assessment available is my own. I practiced this throughout my reign. Before any significant decision, I submitted it to this internal tribunal. Not to guarantee that my decisions were always right, to guarantee that they were always genuinely mine, that they emerged from my actual values rather than from the management of external perception. And the decisions that passed this test, even when they were unpopular, even when they generated the kind of criticism that would have once consumed my interior life, felt different. They felt settled, because they had been endorsed by the only authority that actually mattered. Practice this today. Before your next significant choice, before your next public communication, before your next decision about how to conduct yourself in a difficult situation, pause and ask not what they will think, but whether you can stand before your own honest reason and say, "This is consistent with who I have decided to be." The second discipline is the opinion fast. Choose 1 week. During this week, you will take one specific, concrete action each day that you would genuinely do differently if you were certain no one would ever know about it or assess it. Not actions that harm others, actions that reveal the gap between your authentic preferences and the performance of those preferences for the social audience. Maybe you do not post something you would normally post. Maybe you make a decision at work based purely on what you believe is right, rather than on how it will be received. Maybe you spend an evening doing something that genuinely nourishes you, rather than something that looks like the right kind of leisure on a social platform. Maybe you have a conversation with genuine honesty, rather than with the strategic management of impression. The purpose of this fast is not the abstinence itself, it is the revelation. The gap between who you are when you are performing and who you are when you are not performing is the most honest map of how much of your interior life has been colonized by the audience. See the gap clearly. Then ask yourself which version of the person in that gap you would rather continue building. The third discipline is what I call the legacy test. Not legacy in the sense of public reputation, legacy in the Stoic sense of character, of the person that the accumulated choices of your days actually produce. At the end of each week, ask yourself one question. If every decision I made this week had been made purely from my own deepest values, with no reference whatsoever to how any of those decisions would be perceived by any external audience, what would have been different? And would those differences represent a better or a worse version of the life I am trying to build? In almost every case, I believe the honest answer will be a better version. Because the decisions made from genuine values, from the authentic internal tribunal, rather than from the performance of approval seeking, are almost invariably cleaner, more consistent, more genuinely yours, and more likely to produce the kind of life that at its end can be accounted for with something approaching equanimity. Let me speak now about the deepest truth that underlies everything I have said today. The one that makes the liberation from opinion not merely a psychological benefit, but a philosophical necessity. I died in 180 AD, and the thing I know with certainty that is available to a man at the end of his life, which is available to very few people in the middle of it, is this. The opinions that consume so much of my interior life during my reign are gone. Every one of them. The senators who praised me are dust. The senators who criticized me are dust. The generals who questioned my philosophy are dust. The court that whispered about my decisions is dust. The 30 million people whose collective assessment of my reign occupied so much of my governing energy are, without exception, dust. What remains? The meditations, written for no audience, submitted to no external tribunal, composed in the dark hours of a private practice that I maintained because it was honest and necessary and mine, not because it would be approved of or recognized or rewarded. What remains is the thing I made when I stopped performing and started simply being. Memento mori. Remember that you will die, and ask yourself with genuine gravity, when the opinions of all those who currently hold them have dissolved into the same dust that will eventually claim you, what will remain of the choices you are making now? What are you building that is genuinely yours? What would survive the dissolution of every opinion anyone has ever held of you? If you died tonight, would the record of your recent choices show a person who was governing their own life, or performing it for an audience that is itself, in the long view, entirely temporary? My flesh is dust, but my reason remains. And my reason says this about the liberation from opinion with the full authority of 18 centuries of perspective. The opinions of others are weather. Your character is geography. The weather changes constantly. The geography endures. Stop organizing your life around the weather. Build the geography, course by course, decision by decision, in the private choices that no audience will ever witness, and that are, precisely for that reason, the most honest expression of who you actually are. The Rome that endured was not built for the approval of the barbarians beyond its borders. It was built to the standard that stone and engineering and genuine craft require. Your life deserves the same standard. Build it accordingly, and let the opinions fall where they will. They always have, they always will. And they have never, in the history of human civilization, constituted the actual measure of a life well lived. Now I must ask you, citizens of this age I watch with the particular concern of someone who has seen what the hunger for approval costs across the full arc of a life. Which part of your life has become most thoroughly organized around managing the opinion of others? Where is the performance most exhausting? Where have you made choices based on the external audience that your own honest reason would not have endorsed? Or tell me what gives me genuine encouragement. Where have you already found this freedom? Where have you already made a choice from your own internal tribunal and found, on the other side of it, the particular peace that genuine self-governance produces? Tell me in the comments. I am here. A man who spent the first half of his reign managing opinions and the second half learning to release them, watching your age through this improbable reconstruction, and finding, in the voices of those who are beginning to choose the geography over the weather, the evidence that this liberation is still available. It is still available to you, today, in the next choice. And if these words reach the part of you that is tired of the performance, subscribe to this channel, not to add to the metrics of an audience, as a personal decision made from your own internal tribunal, that this is a space worth returning to, that the conversation happening here between an emperor dead for 18 centuries and a world that has never needed his particular form of clarity more urgently is worth your deliberate, chosen, ungoverned by anyone else attention. The button is there. The choice is yours. And for once, let it be entirely yours. I am Marcus Aurelius. I stopped caring about your opinion 18 centuries ago, and I have never once regretted it.